dive into authentic conversations about ourselves and our community, exploring topics that uplift and inspire us, from personal growth to social change. So grab your teacup and get ready to join the conversation. Oh, I do not like when I do that. Hold on. Okay. Okay, my bad, y'all. Let me bring up this next clip. Y'all remember, like and subscribe when you come to the room to get your teacup filled up. Right after this commercial break, it should be playing.
Violence was starkly depicted in the now infamous 2016 video at the Intercontinental Hotel. The judge cited what he called Combs'
All right, thanks to ABC News Live. We're going to watch this clip. Burden of proof. The case against Diddy denied bail after split verdict. Y'all hear Cassie wrote a letter about it to encourage the judge to keep him in jail due to her being afraid for her life. Okay.
Intensity for violence, adding it is impossible for the defendant to demonstrate that he poses no danger to the community. This coming hours after the verdict. The jury finding Combs not guilty on the most serious charges he faced, racketeering, conspiracy, and 2 counts of sex trafficking. But they did find him guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. After the verdict was read, Combs turned to his family and said, "I'm coming home." He then kneeled on the ground, appearing to pray. Combs' son, Christian, celebrated the decision.
Everybody watching, so happy.
But that is not what's happening tonight. Combs is still in custody. Let's bring in ABC News legal contributors Brian Buckmeyer and Bernardo Villalona. Brian, let's start with you here. A lot of people thought that Combs might walk out of that courthouse today. What happened?
I thought he would get bail.
So ultimately, as you said in the lead up, the judge said that there's a propensity to violence, that based on the video of the Intercontinental Hotel, as well as the evidence in the case, even though he was not convicted of the violence that was associated with the sex trafficking, the violence that was associated with the racketeering conspiracy, it can still be used.
And see, I figured that the judge was going to be biased on the bail, right? The request for bail. He figured in everything else that he unfortunately was not proven to be, able to get convicted on. But yet the judge more than likely used that as a discretion to not give Diddy bail. So unfortunately, Diddy fell on both ends of the sword.
And for the purposes of bail was denied. We're going to see the sentencing come later. But I suspect, and Bernardo, tell me if I'm wrong, I suspect there's going to be a writ. And I think that the defense, probably next week, will go right to the Second Circuit and try again to get him released.
Were you surprised that he didn't walk out today?
I wasn't surprised at all, because you have to think that this judge is in a unique circumstance in the sense that he has heard all the evidence in this case for the last 7 weeks, and he's also heard evidence that wasn't introduced before this jury. So he's in a unique circumstance to know what is his propensity for violence. And also, when you're talking about what happened in this case, remember that a lot of the violence happened behind closed doors. Who's going to police that? Who's going to report that? So there's nothing that he can put in place, a condition to protect the community from Sean Combs.
Hey, Bernard, break down the verdict for us that we found out today.
Yes. So as we all know, racketeering conspiracy, he was found not guilty. But in terms of the racketeering conspiracy, you needed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there was an enterprise and there was an agreement within this enterprise to engage in two of the predicate acts. You would think, hey, you found Sean Combs guilty of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. And all you needed to prove was 2 predicate acts. But guess what? Despite proving the 2 predicate acts, you didn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Combs' enterprise was actually an enterprise that was built with an agreement to engage in these predicate acts. So that arson, that kidnapping, that bribery, no enterprise. The sex trafficking, we knew that was going to be difficult as to Cassie and as to Jane, because that forced fraud or coercion, because there were numerous text messages and messages having to deal with these women wanting the freak off or wanting to engage in these hotel nights. And I think that did leave seeds of doubt for this jury to convict Sean Combs of those counts. So basically, that's what we have. Transportation to engage in prostitution. Very clear that from the 27 escorts that were mentioned during this trial, that they were paid for commercial sex acts and that they were transported across states to engage in them.
Right. I know you said you were surprised. A lot of people were surprised about this verdict. Why?
I was surprised specifically as to the Cassie of it all, right? I thought if there was going to be sex trafficking because of the violence, I thought it might be difficult for a jury to really walk that tightrope of saying this is involved a lot of violence, but the violence wasn't used to traffic her. It was just violence for violence sake. And I could see either side going with either decision in that. But to piggyback on what Bernardo is saying is, I think the difficulty was the criminal conspiracy. I don't think that there was one because, again, as Bernardo said, if you have 2 transportation to engage in prostitution, those are your predicate acts. So the only reason why there is no RICO, it has to be that they did not find there's a criminal enterprise. Now, is that because KK, Christina Quorum, didn't testify? Because D-Rock didn't testify? Because the loyal lieutenants, as the government put them as, didn't stand? Maybe. And maybe hindsight's 2020, and they would think to themselves, maybe we should have put those people on, and that would have carried the day. But we have predicate, so there's only one reason why there's no RICO.
Absolutely. This would have been a different case had the prosecution, the government called KK and flipped her, give her a cooperation agreement to testify against Sean Combs to give us more insight as to what criminal acts took place and what the agreement was, to give us more insight for that jury to know. The jury would have been able to comprehend a cooperation agreement or given her immunity, because sometimes you have to make deals with the devil to be able to get the inside information.
Okay, so what happens next? What can we expect at the sentencing hearing for Combs?
Ooh.
So even before you get to the sentencing, between now and then, at some point in time, Sean Combs will sit down with someone from the probation department within the Southern District of New York, and they will create what's called a PSI, or pre-sentencing investigation. And with that, they'll look at Sean Combs' criminal history, which we know he doesn't have. They'll look at his personal characteristics, mental health, substance abuse, personal characteristics. They'll look at any kind of mitigating or aggravating circumstances. And what they'll do is they'll create a sentencing guideline. They'll give a range of months that they believe the judge should follow in one way, shape, or form as to what Sean Combs should be facing. Now, both sides have already kind of done their calculations. The defense believes that he should get anywhere from 21 to 27 months. The government believes anywhere from 51 to 63 months. And if you're as bad at math as I am, that's basically government saying 4 to 5 years, and the defense saying just shy of 2 years or so, or just a little higher of 2 years.
So how do they decide what he actually gets?
So probation gives you the guideline, right? And then the government is going to ask, as they said, they're going to ask for a significant amount of jail time for aggravating factors to account. And I think the smartest thing that they will do is they'll say, these aren't just 2 transportation to engage in prostitution. Here are the 27 escorts, here are the 2 alleged victims, and here are all the flights. There are dozens of them, and they'll try to use that as aggravating, and they'll also use the violence as aggravation as well. The defense is going to look at all the positive things that you can think about for Sean Combs' mitigation. He donated millions of dollars to HBCUs. He did this for the community. He did that. He was a pillar of society for all of this. And that's why it should be lower. And the judge will take all of those facts and ultimately come up with a decision.
He doesn't have a criminal history. He hasn't been previously.
He doesn't really have a criminal history, but you have to think when it comes to sentencing, especially when it comes to a federal sentence, the judge can take into account bad acts, meaning incidents that you have engaged in that you may have not been arrested for, you may not have been convicted of, but does show your propensity and the type of person you are. This judge is going to try to get the sentence that reflects, one, deterrence, sending a message to the public that this type of behavior will not be stand for. In terms of rehabilitation, what is the best sentence that will rehabilitate Sean Combs so that way when he is ultimately released, he wouldn't be committing these same acts? Punishment, punishment, punishment. How do you punish a person for the act that they've committed? So wise transportation to engage in prostitution is not just 2 acts, but we're talking about dozens and dozens of you transporting these commercial workers for the purposes of sex.
I would say he doesn't have a criminal record, but he does have a criminal history.
Yes.
And that difference is going to be big for him.
Brian, Bernarda, thank you so much for being here with us. And just a moment ago, I believe the Combs family was walking out of the courtroom. I believe some video of that. Joining me now, though, is ABC News investigative producer Tanya Simpson, who has been covering this trial from the very beginning. We're seeing that video there of the family leaving the courtroom just moments ago. Tanya has been in the courtroom with the family and everyone as they've watched this entire trial. You were there today in the room when the verdict was read. Tanya, what was it like in the room?
Hi, Eva. So in the room, there was a moment between when we found out the jury had reached a verdict and when the judge came in and acknowledged there was a verdict, and then they brought the jury into the room to read it. The mood in the courtroom was a little tense, like you could feel it, like there was a lot of anticipation while people were waiting for the jury to come in to hear what the verdict was. When Sean Combs came in, he looked relaxed. He turned around to his mother. He said, "Mom, I love you." His attorneys were standing around the defense table. They weren't really speaking to each other. It was very quiet in the room. Diddy took his seat and he started reading a printout of Psalm number 11. The prosecution attorneys were seated at their table, very quiet. Diddy's family, friends, and supporters were also just kind of seated, waiting to hear what was going to happen when the jury came in to deliver the verdict.
And when the verdict was read, what was the reaction then?
So when the verdict was read, Combs was sitting, he kind of had his head down a little bit. He was kind of shaking or tapping his foot in anticipation of hearing what was going to be said. When he heard not guilty on count one, he kind of pumped his fist a little bit and shook his head. He heard the second not guilty, he pumped his fist again. When he heard the first guilty charge, he did look a little surprised. There was an audible gasp from a couple of people who were sitting in the gallery, some members of the public and a few family members. And as the jury continued to read their verdict, people were pretty quiet. Once the verdict came in and the judge went juror by juror to confirm with them that that actually was their decision, Diddy looked at them, shook his head and mouthed, "Thank you."
Our reporters caught up with Combs' son after leaving the courthouse. Here's what he had to say. Take a listen to this, Tanya.
Hey, yo, we love y'all. We love everybody watching. So happy. Pop's coming home. God bless the whole world.
What was going through your head when the verdict was read? Happy.
And Tanya, you saw Combs' son there. What was the family's immediate reaction when the verdict was read?
So interestingly, there wasn't an immediate reaction when the verdict was read. However, once the jury left the room and the judge was off the bench, the family was very celebratory. They were smiling. They were hugging Diddy's defense attorneys, hugging each other, shaking hands. One member of his family actually called his defense team the Dream Team and thanked them. It was a very, very celebratory mood from the family and friends.
Tanya Simpson, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Still ahead, our Burden of Proof team breaks down this verdict and how the public is reacting to the news. Stay with us.
Live on GMA. Monday.
As we all know, no cameras were allowed in the courtroom during this 7-week trial. We had an incredible team of correspondent attorneys and contributors inside that courtroom, our eyes and ears to what happened. Joining me now to discuss it all, ABC News Chief Investigative Correspondent Aaron Katersky. He's right outside of that courthouse now. Aaron, break down that bail hearing for us first.
Well, it happened about 6 hours after the verdict was read because defense attorneys asked that Sean Combs immediately be released on bail. They offered up $1 million, offered his homes as collateral, and they said the only crime he was convicted of is not a crime of violence. But prosecutors disagreed, saying the violence was evident at trial, pointing directly to the 2016 hotel security camera footage, Eva, that depicted Combs attacking Cassie Ventura. And right away, Combs, who entered the room blowing kisses to his family, ended up hanging his head in disappointment when the judge refused to release him on bail, saying that his propensity for violence is evident in that video, and also citing the defense's own argument, admitting that he was a domestic abuser. And so the judge said he posed a danger to the community and the defense could not overcome that.
Aaron, you were outside when this verdict was read. What was the scene like then?
There was a good deal of anticipation, and then I think there was a swell from Combs' supporters, many of whom were holding T-shirts in support. And there was a disappointment by those who were expecting a different result and who thought that perhaps this would have a chilling effect on the ability of prosecutors to convince potential sex crimes victims to come forward in the future.
Aaron, sentencing is for now set for October. What are you watching for there?
He faces up to 20 years in prison, but in all likelihood, he would not serve quite that much time. But prosecutors have already signaled they are prepared to ask for a significant imprisonment, and the defense is prepared to ask for something far less. The judge didn't drop any hints, but he did note in the bail hearing that he was convinced Sean Combs could be violent. The defense admitted as much. That may factor into sentencing. And just because Combs was acquitted of the sex trafficking, prosecutors said that did not negate what the trial laid bare, that he was addicted to drugs, that he was a domestic abuser and a batterer of women.
Aaron Katersky, thank you so much for your conversation today. And let's continue this conversation with ABC News legal contributors Brian Buckmeyer and Bernardo Villalona, senior culture reporter for ESPN's Anscape, Justin Tinsley, and ABC News contributor and senior entertainment reporter for Anscape, Kelly Carter. Bernardo, let's start with you. You have a lot of trial experience. What do you make of the way that this all went down?
I was surprised that Sean Combs wasn't found guilty of the sex trafficking having to deal with Cassie, because I think that was a completely different story. And having been in a courtroom for her testimony, she came off as so compelling. And as a person that was so broken during the time that she was with Sean Combs, I thought that the jury would find him guilty of the sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. The racketeering conspiracy was a bit difficult. I think if the prosecution had called a co-conspirator to come in and testify and flip that co-conspirator to testify against Sean Combs, we would have been talking about something different.
Brian, SDNY has like a really good conviction rate, over 90%. Do you think that RICO was a mistake for them on this one? I
definitely know about their conviction rate as the fact that we both practice at court. So only be gentle because I've got cases coming up there soon. I think this is a case when it comes down to not properly vetting your case, maybe believing your case more than what other people may perceive. And I understand why the SDNY would look at these alleged victims, why they would look at this fact pattern and say, we have enough to put it all together. But without that critical eye of saying, well, what would another reasonable person interpret with this? What could another person disagree with in terms of why an individual will partake in this relationship for this purpose other than trafficking? And I think without asking those hard questions, they did not prepare their witnesses nor the arguments that they made to get that RICO conspiracy, to get that sex trafficking. And to Bernardo's point, I think so many people, both in social media, both inside the court, are saying, you can't conspire by yourself. Where are the other people? Where is the agreement? And simply just showing that the end result showed some sort of coordinated effort was not enough clearly for these jurors to say there's an agreement between these people to form a criminal enterprise.
Especially for a defendant of this caliber. When you're talking about a celebrity like Sean Diddy Combs, they're not going to look at this like your regular Joe Schmo on the street. Here we're talking about a celebrity, an icon, a man who was given the key to the city. So this jury would have been requesting more than just beyond a reasonable doubt.
Kelly, I want to ask you, because Cassie Ventura's attorney put out a statement today saying that Cassie coming forward has left an indelible mark on both the entertainment industry and the fight for justice. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think effectively what her attorney was saying was that she really gave people the courage to speak out. And we see the immediacy of that, because after her very explosive civil suit filing, a number of other people have filed, similar suits, against Combs. And I think that that's important. She's helped to give voice to people who have been, apparently afraid for a really long time about potentially going up against someone who, again, has been a cultural icon for the better part of 3 decades.
Justin, we have to talk about the cultural icon part of it all. We've talked a lot about the possible impact of this on his legacy. What do you think this means now for his future?
That's such a great question, because when you look at his time in the public eye in totality, right, this trial is right there at the top, because this trial really challenged to examine his fame and how long he's had this fame, right? But it also really fractured this image of success and power that he built for himself. We look over the course of this trial, so many people testified, namely women who testified about horrific experiences with this guy, some really challenging things to his moral character. And look, I understand the jury came to their decision, but those testimonies just aren't erased from public memory. Nobody has the Men in Black button to basically erase people's memory. So when we look at his career and his time in the public eye, and as a full sphere picture, this trial is not a footnote. And I will say this: his sentencing hearing, and this is nothing more than just crazy legal irony, right? Sentencing is October 3rd, 2025. You know what happened on October 3rd, 1995? O.J. Simpson was found not guilty. So when we talk about momentous legal moments on October 3rd, it doesn't really get much bigger than O.J. Simpson and Diddy.
Well, and I just saw Kelly raising her hand over there. You clearly have something to say, Kelly.
No, I was saying I know exactly the significance of that date as well. You know, I think the last time we talked about a trial of this magnitude was the O.J. Simpson trial, which was 30 years ago. You know, when we got that verdict. So that's significant. I will also throw this out there, Justin Tinsley, for you. 30 years ago this summer was the 1995 Source Awards, where, you know, his presence obviously played a big role. And that's where we first saw the height of the East Coast, West Coast hip hop kind of feud escalate. And we've been spending so much time this summer talking about what happened 30 years ago. And now here we are 30 years later. I could not have imagined that we would be talking about not only Combs in the way we've been talking about him, but also Suge Knight in the way we've been talking about him as well.
Kelly, Justin, Brian, Bernardo, thank you all for being here with us and for covering this trial from the very beginning. Coming up, YouTube personality Tisa tells on the moment the verdict was announced and how her hundreds of thousands of followers are reacting.
Sean Diddy Combs, the split decision. Not guilty of sex trafficking and racketeering. Guilty of transportation for prostitution. The verdict sending shockwaves across the country. Now breaking tonight, the new ABC News special. Stunning interviews.
One of the most powerful men in the music industry. And then suddenly, he was over.
New details from inside the courtroom. Diddy, the verdict. The new special breaks tonight at 10/9 Central on ABC.
At any point, you can encounter evil.
Season premiere.
People think the jury dropped the ball. But more importantly, whether or not you agree with the jury's decision, if you look at the chaos outside of the courthouse, it was pandemonium. And when you listen to the threats of violence, the things are being said, decision, whether they meant to or not, sent a message of what is okay and what we'll accept.
Your followers, do they have any questions about the verdict?
They have a lot of questions. They want to know, how did you look past Cassie's testimony, the mother's testimony about the $20,000 that he demanded? How did you look past Bonner being hung over a balcony? How did you look past Capricorn Clark? They have questions about how, as we sat through 6 weeks of gut-wrenching testimony, how that is the only thing they found that was illegal.
Did the reaction to this verdict surprise you?
On Diddy's side, surprised me. I think would be celebrating, and some people were, but it's like they were holding back on the violence they wanted to incite. They were yelling at new media, old media, we're going to beat you worse than Cassie. You shouldn't have did this. You apologize to Diddy. You're going to pay. It wasn't anyone that wasn't pro-Diddy. It was actually shocking to see.
I remember you said at the very beginning of this, you actually had to hire security.
Yes, I actually today had to be ushered out with 2 armed guards from the melee. And there were other YouTubers and, TikTokers that didn't have security. And they were just running scared. They created a sense of hostility, of violence, threatened violence, so much so that they locked down the whole court and pushed everybody across the street. The guards said that they've never seen anything like it.
For you, now that it's all over, how does this feel?
You know what? I feel like exactly what Cassie's attorney said. I wanted to leap forward for society. Instead, we got a small little emotion forward. But you know what? When you look at victims of abuse, when you look at survivors, when you look at what abuse is, it is going to be a long road to fix what is rotten in society. So you know what? The work continues. I know my followers and people that are advocates, the work continues. And one day we actually will get to a point where the next time a Sean Diddy Combs comes into the court, they are held accountable.
Tisa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, too.
And thank you for joining us. For even more on the Diddy trial, make sure you follow our podcast, Bad Rap, the Case Against Diddy, hosted by our very own Brian Buckmeyer, wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Eva Pilgrim in New York. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks for watching. Remember to show your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing. It's a blessing. Keep your teacups filled and ready for my next upload. Until then, stay inspired and remember, always stay gifted.